Right now, Eskom has already made a loss of 10.7 billion rand through supplying electricity to Hillside, the bigger of the two aluminium smelters at BHP Billiton. The differences in interpretation between Eskom and Billiton on the termination date of the electricity supply to the two smelters could negatively impact Eskom's balance sheet even further. Chris Yelland, Managing Director at EE Publishers, is here to give us more. Take us one step back in terms of where exactly we are, and then we can fill in the gaps about where we are going forward.
If I can try and explain, potline 1 and 2 at Hillside, a supply agreement was entered into between Eskom and, at the time, AluSaf, which is now BHP Billiton, to supply electricity to these two smelters, and it was a 25-year contract.
Struck in 1992.
Struck in 1992, signed in 1992, and the contract terminates in 2020. No real dispute on that. The contract is in progress. But later, in 2002, a further contract was established.
An addendum, effectively.
An addendum, actually. It was not. It was really a supplementary contract as opposed to a brand new contract. It was a supplementary contract for an expanded supply to the site to cater for a third potline at Hillside. And this contract was for a similar period, a 25-year period, which took it to 2028. The dispute we have now is that BHP Billiton believed that the supplementary contract extended the contract date of the first contract for potline 1 and 2 from 2020 to 2028, whereas Eskom believe that potline 1 and 2's contract remains until 2020, and potline 3's contract is for to 2028.
All right, so now let's cut through this. What are the implications for BHP and for the South African consumer? Because I look at this selfishly and I go, we're heading into winter. If there's any way to avoid load shedding, would it mean that if BHP, they stopped supplying electricity to BHP, would we have sustainable electricity through the winter? And I'm sure a lot of people are asking you that question.
Short and tall of it is, if they were to stop supplying 10% of electricity, South Africa's electricity, to BHP Billiton, we would not have load shedding this winter. But there are contracts in place, and they are obligated to supply. I'm going to
whip around the desk, sorry, because I know I'm being so rude, but we've got so little time. George, I asked you to stay on. I wanted your viewpoint specifically on this, so we're going to go around the table. Your thoughts on where we're going?
Well, you know, I guess there's a balance to be struck here, because, you know, it's about economies of scale as well, and you'll want your big the big users of electricity are always going to get a discount because of the scale that they utilize. It's a good client to have, they're good pay, etc., etc. But also that it adds to the amount of capacity that Eskom produces. If Eskom were producing just for the household sector, you'd probably find that the cost of production, and I speak under correction here, but the cost of production would probably be significantly higher, and we may even pay more. So it's that you actually need the big users of electricity to provide those economies of scale. I think the question here is whether or not they've gotten the balance right, and by the sounds of it, the balance is a little off here. So perhaps that's what needs to be readdressed, more than the actual concept of supplying cheaper electricity to some of the big producers.
I'm going to get Chris's view, I'm going to get Kevin's view, and I'm going to get you to surmise.
Yeah, the one thing that puzzles me is Eskom saying that it's at a loss, supplying at a loss, because I never understood those contracts to be at a loss. It was a cost plus some risk sharing. So it may well be a marginal cost sort of thing, as how do you actually do the accounting more than anything. But I don't think Eskom is actually I really don't believe it's losing. But as I said, just to echo what George was saying, remember, households go through cyclical peaks, etc., and that sort of thing, whereas these have quite a nice constant offtake, and that's one of the reasons why it's cheaper to supply. You don't need to turn power stations on and off to supply this. It's just constant supply.
Mine was a purely selfish comment. I think I'm just getting colder by the day. So strike my comment from the book.
We need to the whole structure of the electricity industry is probably wrong. Why is Eskom bearing the whole burden for supplying South Africa. Why is that not already split up?
Sure.
Kevin?
But it is what it is, and there's a contract in place, and one's loath to now simply argue that for expediency purposes we can override the contract. So you've got to adhere to that and make sure that you are abiding by those agreements, even if there's a national good at play here. So I'd like to see the regulator have a look at it and come up with a fair recommendation on the way forward. Clearly, from BHP Billiton's perspective, though, they are part of the national economy, and I think there has to be a reasonableness from their perspective. And so you hope for some, as George says, some sort of balance where you look at it and you say, what can be done by all the major users to try and make the situation more palatable for everybody? That would be the ideal situation. But that doesn't mean you can simply override a contract.
Chris, where are we going? We've got a minute left of show.
To answer your first question, are Eskom supplying electricity at a loss? Well, the question is, if they are supplying electricity at below the cost of primary energy, below the cost of coal, then they clearly are sustaining a loss, and that is in fact the case in potline 1 and 2.
Okay.
The question also is this: what is the impact of this dispute? It's an extra 8 years of running at a loss. At the moment in Eskom's balance sheet, they have made provision for 5.5 billion rand of loss to the end of 2020. If they have to extend this contract to 2028, it's potentially another 5.5 billion. That would have to be declared on their balance sheet, and that would also, because there's a change in liability, it would mean a loss on the income statement.
How do you see this ending? We've got 30 seconds till the end of the show.
I see it ending in court.
In court. A long, protracted, drawn out.
At 5.5 million, you can spend a lot on lawyers.
5.5
billion.
Billion.
Yes.
Billion.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Chris Yelland, Managing Director, EE Publishers. George Guinness, Managing Director at ETM. And of course, we've also had Chris Hart and Kevin Lings on the deck.